that right now. Great. So, I guess sort of to set the scene a little bit, how did you kind of get your start in music and with poetry as well? And when did you kind of realize this is something you wanted to pursue?
So I grew up very shy and very quiet. Yeah, and used to like have a lot of social anxieties. So when I was young, I was in seventh grade, eighth grade, no seventh. Yeah, so I think I was like 13, 14. I went through a surgery. I don't know if you know what an adenoid is,
Actually,
but
no.
it's the filter between the nose and the mouth.
Oh,
Yeah. So mine has always been swollen, and like I went through my whole life with a clogged nose and not realizing that that's what it was. So they had to remove it surgically. So I had the week off of school, but I was in like intense pain that entire week.
oh,
Even using like codeine because they had me on codeine. So I ended up writing my first hip hop verse about that to help me kind of get over the pain and stuff like that. And then because I always loved hip hop, I grew up on hip hop. Um, I love music in general, but hip hop always still has like a special place in my heart because of without it, I wouldn't have discovered music in general.
yeah.
So from there, like I was writing horrible hip hop verses until ninth grade. I met my current bandmate. His name is Curtis. He goes by stage name Masai. Met him in high school through my older brother. They were friends, and he taught me how to properly songwrite, how to structure, how to bar. Because before that, it was just kind of like free verse, right?
Yeah.
And that was huge and drastic for me because we grew up in Ottawa South, um, in government housing. So my parents didn't have extra money to send me to like to learn an instrument or like to get a proper tutor for my songwriting. So to have somebody kind of take me under their wing and see the potential in me, even though at the time his bandmate was telling him not to waste his time, and come being like the shy, quiet kid who grew up very isolated, very quiet. Like my older brother was the one who really spoke for me back then, and still is my best friend. Like that meant a lot to me, and it showed me that I had potential. And for me at that age, that was massive because you grow up in government housing, you feel like you have no potential sometimes, right? Um, then fast forward a few years, in 10th grade, I discovered spoken word hip hop through HBO's Def Poetry, and at that point in my life, I thought that was the coolest thing. Like they were the spoken word artists were the epitome of cool. There was no topping that, and I wanted to be that with every fiber of my being. I wanted to be that. Um, so I was like, well, how do you write a poem? Because I had no mandate, I had like no previous history. So I actually started tackling it like writing a hip hop verse, like the way that Curtis had shown me. And that's why that was such a big deal, because if it wasn't for that form of writing and like being taught how to structure a hip hop verse, I wouldn't have been able to apply that to spoken word, and I wouldn't have led to everything that I have today. So I wrote my first poem for my 10th grade crush, give to her at lunch on Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
and he read it right in front of me, mumbled "That's nice," and just threw it in the garbage right in front of me. And so naturally, I did what any self-respecting human would do. I fished it out of the garbage while everybody was watching, and kind of went home for the day. And I was like, I'm not going to school, and I can't face people after this experience. So I wrote a verse about that, like a poem about that, and then I just kept writing. My first ever performance was my 12th grade holiday assembly, and there is footage of it. Not one that I share,
Yeah.
but I mean, it wasn't the worst. But that was my first ever performance, and then from that, it led to there's a saying with artists. I don't think it's exclusive to just spoken word artists or hip hop artists, but they're like one gig always leads to another, right? So that was my first gig, like my first performance, and I got such a great reception out of it that I was like, okay, there is something here, you know. And it helped kind of embolden me a little bit. So from there, I got an invitation to perform at Glebe High School's open mic coffee house because they were short. It was supposed to be an in-school thing, but they didn't have enough interest, so they kind of outsourced it to artists across Ottawa. which was still in Ottawa South, but it was on like more of the, I don't know. How familiar are you with Ottawa?
I've never been there. Yeah.
Okay. So the Glebe area is very like trendy, very like, you know, soccer moms and hipsters.
Yeah.
So Glebe is on that side. Ironically, I'm in the Glebe right now. My girlfriend lives in the Glebe. But yeah, so I went out and I did the performance, and it turns out the person organizing it was a poet by the name of Dovie Henry, uh, passed away sadly, and he was hosting it on his birthday because he just wanted a celebration. So I connected with him, and him and I were very much the same person but different. He was very boisterous, very cocky, you know, very loud, outspoken, and I was like the other side of the coin. And he taught me or told me about the Urban Legends Poetry Slam just starting up, and that they were doing this open mic kickoff at the National Art Gallery, and it was an open mic free sign up. So that was my next performance. I did that. Met Shihan. Shihan was a huge hero of mine. Was on Def Poetry multiple times. Just happened to be in Ottawa because that was the first year. It was 2009. I remember it very well because I just graduated high school, and they just kicked off this slam series. It's still ongoing. It runs out of Toronto actually by Dwayne Morgan, called When Brothers Speak, and then they have the other side of it too, When Sisters Speak. And but that year, that was the first year they brought it together, and it was like easily the biggest show in North America. And so they had a lot of artists and poets from the States, from all across Canada, and it was a huge success. And Shihan just happened to be in Ottawa because he's usually from Los Angeles. At that moment
Yeah.
in time, when I decided to give myself 2 days to memorize a poem, and also memorize a poem for the first time in my life. So I got a
Mm.
little anxious and kind of blanked out in front of him, but he came up after me, or after I finished, and he told me like, you know, there's a lot of potential there. I can tell you're still new, but stick with it. And I don't even think he remembers that, but that meant the world to me to have like one of your idols come up to you and be like, hey, I see something in your work, and I think there's something there. So I
Yeah.
just kind of kept with it,
Yeah.
and that was, I think, you know, you asked like what moment did you realize? It wasn't like one singular moment. It was multiple. Again, coming
Mm.
from like the inner city, coming from public housing, you know, you don't really see your potential sometimes. And to have Curtis take me under his wing and teach me to, you know, perform at my holiday assembly and, you know, get a great reaction. And also, one thing I left out was my English teacher at the time was the one who told me about the Glebe High School thing, allowed me to skip his class, and even drove, like, canceled his class entirely and drove me, my older
Wow.
brother, and one of my friends to Glebe so that I can be there to perform, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So
Wow.
like it's all these little moments
Yeah.
that helped kind of encourage me and made me realize that my voice does matter. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, and what circumstances you were born into. Like what I had to say was still very, very valid.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And I mean, you kind of touched on it, but who or like what are some of your biggest inspirations, even in terms of like any kind of artist that kind of gave you inspiration?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of hip hop artists because that's also another way that I learned how to, you know, structure because I love to rhyme,
Yeah.
given my hip hop background, and that's how I learned how to like, you know, internal rhyming and all of that. I learned all of it through studying lyrics. So lyrics are like Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Common. There's an artist from Detroit named Elzai that I really respected. Another one from Minneapolis named Idea. So I just kind of would break down their verses and see kind of how they would string their rhyme chains together and try to emulate that myself.
Mm.
But outside of that, my parents have been a huge, huge inspiration. A lot about what I write tends to lie, and not exclusively too, but a lot of it kind of tends to lie in family and ancestry and heritage and you know where you come from. Outside of that, Curtis Masai, if it wasn't for him, I tell him all the time, you know, if it wasn't for him, I would not be the artist I am today, and I very much do believe that. Uh, and then you know you got your HBO Deaf Poets, you got your Shihans, your J Ivies. Like I consumed deaf poetry like it was nobody's business. And that was one of my main goals actually when I first started. I was like, I'm gonna be on deaf poetry. And at the time, you know, some of the people who knew me who in high school who knew I was quiet and they're like, yeah, okay, you know, you sure, absolutely. And I mean, Def Poetry ended and I didn't quite make it there, but one of my poems was actually featured on Button Poetry. So I feel like I kind of, you know, conquered that goal in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess speaking of that, speaking about like your group, Poetic Elements, how did that come to be?
So Curtis had just moved to Uplands because he was in another neighborhood also in the South called Deborah. And he just moved in. He didn't know too many people in Uplands. So one of his friends that lived in Deborah knew my brother, kind of connected us together. And they got really close, my older brother and Curtis. And he lived like a 10-minute walk from us. And Curtis like loved East Coast hip hop, classic East Coast hip hop. My older brother loved classic West Coast hip hop. So they would always bicker about that. I was kind of in the middle, kind of taking it all in. Um, and then he told me he rapped, and my older brother told him that I rap. So I kind of went to his house and showed him a few things, and immediately he noticed I don't know how to bar. So he showed me how to do that, and then it went from like him mentoring me to him being like, "Hey, did you just want to be a band together?" Because his then partner kind of dropped out and stopped doing music in general. So we kind of connected, and we always had like a similar energy, which is funny because him and I are very different people. He's an ex linebacker who actually got a scholarship to go play semi-professionally in Syracuse, and he turned it down to stay here and make music with me.
Yeah.
So that meant a lot for me. For me, I was like a little skinny, like I literally weighed like I think 119 pounds in high school. Geeky, loved comic books. I still do. And he's this like big ex linebacker. So we were very, very different people. But what brought us together was music.
Yeah.
And through writing together and recording together, and we went through a lot of ups and downs. We used to cut class and record music at Fat Dog Studios, which also no, they moved. They didn't close down. They moved, but it was in the neighborhood. And then we actually went on to do bigger shows. We opened up for a lot of respected artists, a lot of our heroes, which was a big deal for us. But we're not currently active as a band. Curtis went on to do school, and he was a stepfather for a little while, although not
Mm.
anymore. So we're kind of starting with the idea of bringing it back.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it wasn't for him, literally, if it was not for him, I would not be here today at all, especially through a lot of the trials and tribulations, because being an artist is hard,
Yeah.
especially coming from Middle Eastern parents who are like, well, you got to go to university, you got to support the family, you got to help. Like, I was the first one to graduate high school on time and the first
Mhm.
one to do university in my family. And I kind of buckled under that pressure and didn't want to do that. I wanted to be an artist. So, my parents took it really, really hard at first. Now they understand where I'm coming from. But
Yeah.
at the time, like, that was a very, very big struggle between us.
Yeah. And in terms of like actually writing music, what does the creative process, and even just poetry too, what does the process kind of look like for you?
Yeah. So I'm also part of another band called Funky Colors.
Oh, yeah.
And so lately, it's been very organic, and I love it. I've never actually written like this before, with the exception of the last like 3 years. But I've learned to embrace it. Before, what we used to do with Poetic Elements, because Masai Curtis would produce
Yeah.
and rap. So he would produce the beat, send it to me, and be like, "Hey, this is the idea. This is the concept." He had lyrics to it, be like, "This is what I've written so far," and then I would try to match it. Other times, you just give me the instrumental, be like, "Write whatever you want," and then I'll write whatever I want, and we'll find some way to bring it together.
Yeah.
Um, but then with Funky Colors, it became like more of just like studio chill session. I would show up. The other half of it is an artist named Guru. His real name is Richard. Richard would be like, "Hey man, so what kind of mood are you feeling today? What kind of vibe?" And then I'd be like, "I don't know, like something happy, something bouncy, or like we'll think of a word or a color, and then we'll just like YouTube, you know, and see what comes up, and then we'll just write on the spot. So we'll
Mhm.
have this whole track written, recorded, and semi-audio engineered, not fully, but all from scratch on the spot. So and that's kind of how I like to write hip hop now, because I just feel like it's more in tune, it's more organic, and it's more of a collaboration as opposed to like the cut and paste process that Curtis and I were doing. In
Yeah.
terms of poetry, to be honest, I'm always on the go. I used to organize actually. That's the funny thing. I started out performing at the Urban Legends Poetry Slam, and then I took it over in 2014 and became at the time the youngest director, not anymore. And I was still am the longest running director. Um, so to go from being the shy, awkward, fresh out of high school kid, slamming against people who have gone on to become world champions, because I was competing against people like Ian Keteku, Open Secret, Ikena, The Recipe, which is like a crazy troupe of spoken word artists, and that's who like I was going up against in my first year of poetry. And the difference, are you familiar with the difference between spoken word and slam? Because I know the term gets used interchangeably.
I'm actually not. Yeah, I
Yeah, no, not a
definitely
problem.
new to the world of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people, confuse it to the same thing. So slam poetry, slam is only slam when it's competitive,
Mm,
and then spoken word is just the art form. So if you're doing a performance that's not a competition, it's just spoken word poetry. So like
okay.
slam poetry is like the rap battles of spoken word, just like rap battles are the rap battles of hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So to go up against people who've gone on to become world champions. And I wasn't scoring so well when I first started, and it could have easily been discouraging. Back then, like the scene was different. Now, like the scene's a little more um, friendly, I want to
Yeah.
say. But I mean, there's merit to everything. Back then, you'd have people come up to you and be like, "Yo, your poem sucks," and I'll tell you why. So it wasn't just
Oh,
like, "Yo, you suck." It's like, "Hey, this is what you can improve on."
yeah.
Whereas now people are a little more delicate with that, which I mean is good.
Yeah.
Because again, being this 19-year-old and having like really respected poets, at one point, even like the co-creator of Urban Legends came up and was like, "Yo, you suck, and this is why." And I was like, "That's kind of discouraging." But
Yeah.
at that point, I wanted to be a spoken word artist, and I was not going to give that up. So I took in consideration what I thought like I could apply to myself, and then left some of the criticisms that might have left me, performing more like this poet, because I wanted to be my own performer, right?
Yeah.
And it forced me to get better quicker.
Right.
So with writing spoken word, sorry, I love to ramble, I love to talk. So
No, no,
I'll try
no worries.
to with writing spoken word, um, I can write it anywhere and everywhere because I was directing Urban Legends, and I grew it to be more than just a slam. It became the Urban Legends Poetry Collective. So, like I told you, with my childhood, my parents didn't have money. So one of the things I created was the after-school youth writing program, Youth Speak, and I
Yeah.
wrote that, or I created that in collaboration with the Ottawa Public Library, and it was just an easy drop-in, whenever you can, once a week, writing session with youth, and they were being mentored by really respected songwriters, hip hop artists, poets, um, storytellers in Ottawa, and it was all free. And to me,
Okay.
that was such a big deal, so important. It ended up running 5 years. I did give it up. I work at a 24-hour care group home now.
Oh, wow.
So my time, and that's why I do apologize about yesterday. I need to apologize as well. Um,
Yeah,
one of
no
my
worries at all.
coworkers came in late, and I couldn't leave because somebody always has to be
Yeah.
on residence. Yeah, so
Yeah, of
when
course.
I
No problem.
started doing this, oh, thank you. I appreciate the understanding.
Hmm.
Um, when I started doing the work, I could no longer commit to You Speak anymore. So I passed it on to another really respected spoken word artist, and she ran it, and they kind of stopped doing it because of COVID. So kind of folded. But what's inspiring to see is a lot of the youth that we mentored are now in talks to bring it back to themselves
Yeah.
and have them do it. Yeah. So that's kind of really cool. But because I took on a lot, um, for spoken word, my writing sessions became wherever I was, in between meetings, wherever I could write. So if I had 3 hours from one meeting to the next, and my parents moved us out to the suburbs after high school, um, and it was like a long bus trip. I just recently got my license, so I'm like, well, there's no point going home and coming back. I might as well find a coffee shop and write. And that's how my writing process became. It's very guerrilla. Like, okay, I got
Yeah.
this amount of time, go here, write. And then the other side of that is You Speak, because with You Speak, I was there every Monday. I wanted to be there because it ran on Mondays, even though like we had split it up because it's a 3 hour time block. So what we would do is we'd have 2 people on at all times. Then at the hour and a half mark, we'd swap and have another 2 people come in and kind of take over. So that way it wasn't like very time consuming for any of the artists because it was all volunteer based, right?
Yeah.
But I like to be there every Monday. So if I was there, it would just mean 3 people were there to mentor the youth. And that became a lot of my writing sessions too. So what we would do is we put 20 minutes on the clock and then everybody would write in complete silence in whatever way they wanted to, whether it's, notebook and pen, whether it was through the phone with music on, without music on. But, they did their own thing. And then after that, we would come back and then they had the option of sharing if they wanted to. And they were able to create new poems if they wanted to on the spot or come in with something they already were working on and continue on it. And then after that, we would just kind of speak about each other's work and what we liked, what we enjoyed. And then from there, we would rinse and repeat. So we would have 3 20-minute hour sessions, or sorry, 3 20-minute writing blocks, what I meant. And then
Yeah.
like every hour,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then we'd come back and share. And then that became where I would write because I was there pretty much. I would have an hour to write. And I ended up creating like a lot of my better current poems through YouTube, which is why I really miss it. Now, like I'm at work all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely makes it harder. And I guess kind of segueing into it, what are some of the similarities that you see between writing poetry and writing hip hop music?
I mean, speaking for myself, they go hand in hand. Like I said,
Yeah.
coming from the inner city and not having like I'm self-taught, right?
Yeah.
So my frame of mind, my philosophy is you never have to start anything from scratch because
Mm.
there's always somebody who has done some of the work that you could adapt and apply to yourself, right?
Yeah.
And then when it came to spoken word, um, I was the one who did the previous work that I could adapt because I just adapted how I wrote hip hop. And then I just kind of like, because with hip hop, you have 16 bars
Yeah.
and that would be a verse, right? And then you have 8-bar hooks. And then you can play with that formula sometimes because Poetic Elements, we were a duo. So, and with the way hip hop verses are structured, is you'd have 3 verses, so 3 16-bar verses. But because we were only 2 people, we decided to get rid of that third verse. And with Curtis doing the production, and instead we did 24 bars. So by adding that extra 8 to each of us, it would end up rounding to the same time as a regular song, so like 3 minutes. And the thing with slam is you only have 3 minutes to do your poem with a grace period of 10 seconds. If you go over, they deduct score. So then I started playing with that formula with myself because initially I came in writing only 20 lines as if it was hip hop, so like 20 bars, but that was too short. Then I started writing 48, but that was too long. So then I found the sweet spot to be, and like the way I write, I've been told it's very mathematic, which is ironic because I'm really bad at math. Um, So I write anywhere from 30 to 36 lines with a syllable count of 16 to 21 per line. And then by doing it that way, I noticed that my poem would finish around 2.5 minutes, which is the sweet spot. Because if you mess up, you have 30 seconds to kind of get yourself back on track. And then if you need extra time, you still have that 10-second grace period, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, I found hip hop and spoken word and my experiences go hand in hand. And the way I write spoken word is similar to how I write hip hop. The only thing is with hip hop, you have the instrumental that creates the emotion for you. Where with spoken word, you kind of have to create that emotion for yourself. So, and it's
Yeah.
cool. I find hip hop to be more fun to write. I find spoken word to be more introspective. Um, but they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes I can have fun writing a poem and then write a very introspective song. But um, I love writing in general. I'm a huge advocate for writing. Writing helped me get over my shyness, my social anxieties. I learned a lot about myself through the act of writing. I'm very in tune with myself, and that wouldn't have happened if I didn't write. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that. I think even just like with my own personal writing and journalism and all of that, definitely as a shy
for
person
sure.
here too, yeah, definitely
Okay.
know how that feels.
And that's
Yeah,
what I tell my students all the time because I teach as well, right? And I tell
yeah,
them like, write no matter what it is. Like, if you're journaling, that's still writing, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
don't have to share it. If storytelling is still writing, like just write. I find writing to be so important, and it comes with so many benefits
Right.
that it I think it's something that should be done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I fully agree. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess my last kind of question is, kind of basic, but, do you have any advice for aspiring poets or artists?
Yes, I have multiple advice. Probably the most important is, your voice is very valid,
Mhm.
and you have something to say, so say it. Don't be afraid to say it. Share your work, you know? And even if you don't, even if, like, I'm not saying you absolutely need to write to share your work, but if you're in that avenue, do it. Never second guess yourself. Never feel like that your voice isn't as valid as someone else's, because of that's something I struggled with when I first started performing. Again, like, I was performing alongside very established poets, and sometimes I feel like my voice wasn't as valid. It's like, no, the thing I love about poetry, and it's another thing that I teach a lot, is there's no wrong way to do it. Poetry is individual, to use your own fingerprint, and just how I do spoken word doesn't mean you have to do it the same way, right? And just remember that, honor yourself, honor. There's a big, excuse me, saying in spoken word: remember why you wrote it, and I want to pass that on. So never give up. Just keep writing. One thing will always lead to the next. Believe in yourself. Again, being in the arts can be very difficult, very tough, but also not impossible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your information and wisdom. Yeah, that's all I have for today.
Thank you,
Um,
Irene, and thank you for being
yeah, thank
patient
you.
with.
Of course, no worries at all.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
appreciate, like, understanding with my work stuff that happened
Yeah, no
yesterday.
problem.
Yeah,
Yes.
and if
All
you have
right.
any follow-up questions or anything at all, just let me
Yeah.
know. I'm very open. So yeah,
Awesome.
it doesn't need to end here.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everything.
You're very welcome. Good luck,
Awesome.
eh?
Thank you. Thanks.
Mhm. Have a great Tuesday.
Thank you. You too. Bye.